Welcome to the Crypto Show right here in the Valley of the Sun and the home of Dash at ASU University. And we have Ryan on the line after a pretty bold presentation. I don't really even know what to think about it. Chuck, you know much more about this, so take the lead, please.
I mean, I don't know if I know more about it. I mean, that was a very excellent, I would say, economic presentation for those interested in economy, and it was a very thorough breakdown of what's going on in the Masternode system and how the structure of the tokens is needing to be distributed is the message that I got. A little bit more to the users, it seems, and it seems that you have a sense that the Masternode owners are willing to essentially put more skin in the game to support this allocation, and you'd like to see this conversation go forward. Is that a good? I mean, I'm getting the impression that you're going to need a large conversation from a lot of different people. How long do you expect something like this to play out?
Well, I was asked the exact same question a few minutes ago, and I think the answer is that it varies. This isn't one monolithic set of changes. There are different discrete changes that we can make to improve the system. We could separately address the proposal system allocation issue, separate from the proof of work or entropy replacement issue.
Right.
We could address some of the economic issues separately. And I think that there are going to be some items, at least, that can have a significant or meaningful impact, wouldn't take a lot of time to implement, and we have broad-based agreement across the community that we can implement those things. If that is the case, there are some things that we should be able to execute and make improvements right away. There are some other elements that are probably more deep, such as the block creation mechanism or the consensus mechanism on our network, that would take more research, more data in order to make a decision, and would take longer to implement, and those could come later in the process. But this is about starting the conversation and figuring out what are the things that we can agree on and start executing.
So, for the purpose of this, people who didn't see the stream are kind of at a loss for this. So, sum up exactly in short terms what.
Well, can I try and you correct me if I'm wrong? Because I'm getting two very simple messages. Number one, maybe it's time to show the miners the door, and number two, it's time to invite the users in to participate without disrupting the existing Masternode system too much. And that's what I got out of it. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think that during the presentation, I demonstrated how the Masternode system does introduce some instability within the network, and that I likened it to trying to drive a truck backwards with a trailer attached. It's possible to do that, but it's very sensitive, and if you make a wrong move, it can go catastrophically wrong. And so, to the extent that we can avoid touching the Masternode system, it's probably the least risky path. And the other key is, I think that we need to reduce the expenses of the network and allocate that towards our users, because our users are the ones who are experiencing the most in terms of supply inflation. And that really does have an impact on our economics over long periods of time. The second element is I think that there's inflexibility within our proposal system. 10% is not always the right answer. And in talking with almost anybody, they agree with me on this, that 10% at the peak of the bubble was way too much money. We were blowing money on MMA fighters and things that we didn't have because we didn't have infrastructure in place. It takes time for that infrastructure to develop when price is increasing rather rapidly. For new teams to spin up, to be able to hire people in an efficient way and put them to work. You can only grow so fast. And so a lot of the proposal system was going unused, or it was being wasted on frivolous things. And right now, we would probably like to have more going towards the proposal system than is currently going there. We're laying off team members. A lot of our team members are working for free. Stopping development isn't a good option. And so at times like these, we need to invest in our future. And that means allocating more towards the proposal system. And so this fixed 10% that was set by the ivory tower, there was no real logic or experience behind it. We should be able to flex over periods of time, and that can only be a healthy thing.
I may be understanding it wrong, but it seemed like, okay, so we're going to phase out mining and then introduce more proof of stake, and then even like kind of lure people away from being masternodes into proof of stake if they want to lower their investment.
Well, it's not about luring; it's about creating an even better option, right? And so, that is a lure, right?
Right.
But it's not necessarily proof of stake. Proof of stake is a consensus algorithm. We're not necessarily saying that we're going to proof of stake. What we are saying is we want to reduce and or eliminate the amount going towards mining if we can safely introduce consensus algorithms or combinations of consensus and validation mechanisms that would make the network every bit as safe, but at a much lower cost. And
so I want to comment on that if I could. I agree. I want to say I agree. I think it's a great and bold proposal, and I think that if you can somehow replace the proof of work mechanism with a mathematically provable, ideally decentralized activity of some kind, then you're probably in good shape. And I'm wondering what you've seen in that way, and is it time to experiment with that stuff? And do you want to take the proposal system in that direction? Is it time for hackathons or anything like that? What do you think?
Well, Codablock has an early version of a DIP that he's working on that would replace the entropy or randomness of the hashes of proof of work. And he proposes using chain locks as that mechanism. Chain locks have all the attributes of a great proof of source of entropy. They're completely unpredictable, but they are deterministic, and they're even unpredictable by the last participant in signing one of those BLS signatures that underpin chain locks. And so BLS signatures are completely random, and they're not predictable by anyone until they're created. And so they have really great attributes as far as a source of entropy. And it's important within our system to have that entropy because a lot of different decisions on the network, like who participates in a particular long-living masternode quorum is selected, is determined by those hashes. And so we need something that cannot be manipulated. Proof of stake is vulnerable to that. So if we can come up with a way to combine some other source of entropy with proof of stake and the security of chain locks and perhaps some backup mechanisms, we think we can become every bit as secure without the expenses of this electricity and hardware and things that are going outside of our network.
There was one at Coin Agenda that was talking about using lasers from the telescopes in Chile for the randomness. So you were getting free mining, proof of work mining through the lasers from.
Yeah, I mean, there are some good sources of entropy out there. That is probably one of the crazier ones I've heard.
Yeah, it was.
And that requires reading data from outside of your network, which can be problematic. But if we can create that entropy within the network, I'd say that'd be ideal.
But as far as the masternodes voting, so if we're getting more proof of stake, will they have any kind of maybe a less weighted vote than masternodes, so that they have input as far as where the voting goes?
What proof of stake is it's a block production and consensus mechanism, just like it replaces mining.
Right.
So block producers and block validators, the masternodes, still remain separate entities in that type of a setup, which is healthy, right? It ensures a separation between the ability to produce and the ability to validate those blocks. And so I think that is a healthy balance. There are mechanisms that would involve proof of service where masternodes could produce the blocks. That doesn't necessarily mean that the rewards would be allocated completely towards masternodes.
Because when I heard you saying it, the first thing that came into my mind is, well, if people are not masternodes anymore and they shift over to being just proof of stake, then if they're not voting, then the decision making seems a little more centralized.
Well, I think that there's a high percentage of masternodes that don't vote today. They don't participate in the voting. Look, if we shifted to proof of stake today, staking would be more profitable than masternode operation. People would shut down their masternodes. Who would be the most likely candidates to shut them down first? Well, it'd be people who don't value the vote.
Yeah.
And so the people that aren't even participating in our voting are the ones that would be likely to make that shift. And it wouldn't take that many masternodes shifting over to staking before you'd reach a new equilibrium. And I don't think it would decentralize our system at all. I think that people that valued the voting would stay there because the two ROIs would roughly equal each other as long as people are logical.
I know Decred uses an incentivization. Like if you don't vote, you don't get as much of a reward.
Paying people to vote is problematic, though, because I worry about vote quality at that point. It's the end of the vote. I've got 2 hours left to vote.
Yes, no,
yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Right, exactly. And so I don't want to necessarily incentivize bad behavior. I don't necessarily agree with what Decred does there. I think that voting is a power that you are entrusted with, but you shouldn't be required or financially incentivized to do it. I think that it's unclear to me whether the ROI of operating a masternode would be higher or lower than staking in this type of an environment. On the one hand, I bet that operating a masternode is kind of a pain in the ass. And so on that regard, it probably would demand a higher ROI. On the other hand, you do get a vote in the system.
And it can be dangerous if you're not the one handling your own masternode.
Yeah, that's true too. And so, in stocks, for example, shares that vote, that have voting rights, have a premium on the market. They get a lower return on investment because they do have that voting capability. So that would argue for maybe masternodes would have a lower ROI than staking. So I don't know how it would shake out, but I suspect that they'd come pretty close to each other because economic incentives would drive people to shift their allocation between the two.
Well, I'm certainly excited to see what's going to come of this, and I feel like this is going to be looked at. I mean, there was a lot of chat going on. I was in a few different chat rooms, and I'll let you know that the response was generally positive. I mean, people are looking at it like, oh, this is a bold move. There's a lot of surprise out there. There's and I think everybody's kind of on board for this let's have a conversation kind of thing. What do you think? I mean, how can we facilitate this conversation? Not everybody's going to go to Reddit. Not everybody's going to go to the forums. I mean, how can we do this? There's so many different outlets, channels. How do we manage this conversation?
Well, I think that there's a combination of different tools that we're going to have available. This whole thing kind of started about 2 weeks ago. It started 2 years ago, right? When I first started thinking of some of these ideas, but 2 weeks ago was when I really sat down and had set aside some real time to deeply think about this and document all of the things that I'd been thinking about and put it into a presentation form and try to put it in a persuasive argument. And I shared it with the team and everyone was incredibly supportive. It's moved at rocket speed since then with the developers, with the entire team. I shared it with them earlier in the week. They were all incredibly supportive. And here's what I suspect is, we're going to have to set up some mechanism for people to submit ideas, whether that's just a simple email address where people can submit things into the product team to consider as part of our feature set. We're going to have debate. That's going to happen in a lot of different forums. I think it's going to happen on Discord. It's going to happen on Reddit. It's going to happen, in all the places that Dash users congregate. I think that we're going to have the equivalent of Ask Me Anythings, where people can get clarity from me on exactly what I'm talking about, how I envision certain things working. We can have other members of the team there for it so that, we can get multiple perspectives from, Bob, as far as how implementable things are and things of that nature, so that we can really get a much better understanding of this, especially those who would be voting on any of the proposals that we put forward. We're going to have to consult with experts because, like it or not, experts on governance systems, experts on economics, experts on the code, and what would be needed to code this are all going to be necessary.
Hopefully with Ethereum switching to proof of stake, you'll learn from their mistakes too and not make because
that is one aspect. I'm if I could make one request, I would love to see some amount of prototyping. I would love to see, say, hey, that looks like an experiment. Let's pursue that or build that out, and see how that goes as a maybe we end up with a library of forks of Dash that can be run on a test net for those kinds of experiments. I don't know if that's something that we could facilitate, but I would love to see these different experiments kind of play out, and maybe we can throw AI or machine learning at it to simulate crowds, as a for instance, and see what these economic models look like.
How would you move away from the mining, the proof of work mining? Would you like accelerate the algorithm so that it goes downward?
It really, the answer to that question depends on what end state we're targeting. What you don't want to have happen in most scenarios is there's a date where a switch flips, because that can create chaos. Let's just play out the following scenario. Let's say that we do want to move to proof of stake, and we have a date and time or a block number where it flips. What could happen is masternodes all see that the ROI is higher. A huge number of them shut down and switch to staking. The ROI of a masternode skyrockets, and the ROI of staking drops. And all of a sudden you've got chaos. It starts swinging back the other way. People are spinning up masternodes, and it takes time to equal out. I would argue that you need some type of transition period in most of these scenarios where it gradually happens so that we don't see chaos on the network. There may even be a situation where proof of work mining can't go away. We determine it can't. You could have a situation where every sixth block is proof of work mined, so that proof of work mining is always there as a backup in case chain locks fail. And so
kind of like Digibyte does some alternated mining like that.
Yeah, and so you could incentivize enough miners to stick around and provide proof of work mining in case proof of stake combined with chain locks were to fail. So if chain locks were to fail because of some problem on the network or a DDoS attack or something, that there could be a failover mechanism.
That might be
if there wasn't a chain lock on the previous block, the next block is proof of work.
Yeah, that would be interesting, especially if it was random and you never knew when proof of work was going to take over.
Yeah, I mean, it would ensure that there's always proof of work miners sitting at the idle, ready to provide security.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. I had a thought pop in, and I think it's particularly relevant for your skill set, Ryan, is from an economic or legal perspective, do you think that there are, in this conversation, are there any risks that that we have to avoid in these staking or shareholding movements to not bring in undue risk from regulators or anything like that, or jurisdictional, controls?
It's a great question. There are some attributes of this that I think that, particularly from security standpoint, the Securities and Exchange Commission has said that just because you start out as a non-security doesn't mean you can't become one. I think we have so many attributes that don't make us a current security that we're protected against that. Even if this does crop up as an issue, and in consultation with, we approach them and ask them a few questions about how they would view certain types of changes. I think proof of stake, they clearly wouldn't, right? Because proof of stake, they're providing a job to the network. They're not actually just collecting interest or something like that. Some of these other models might have legal implications. We can always ask, and they are obligated within a certain period of time to provide us some type of response on that. But I think that we have so many attributes that make us not a security, and you only need to fail one of the tests to not be a security.
Okay.
So I think we're well protected against some of these risks. But it would be another attribute that would push us more in that direction. And it could be a consideration.
So I guess just looking forward then for the next, you've been with Dash now for almost 5 years?
3.5, yeah, almost 4 years. I started out so I was coming spring of 2016 was when I first joined the team.
So taking into account, we're almost 4 years in. how do you think these changes that you're proposing, given the timeline that you've experienced now, how long do you see this taking to play out and like getting to a resolution, like realistically from your position?
Realistically, I don't think it's as long as developing new layers to your network. We're talking about changes to layer one. We're talking about changes to the fundamental economics. Some of those changes are pretty quick. Some of those changes are more extensive. But I don't think we're talking about one team that would need to implement those, not cross-team. We're not talking about inventing new technologies. We're talking about altering the, some of these things that we currently use. I think that some of them, they're all based on technologies that either already exist or that we already have some form of, like the idea of a deterministic holders list or something. We already have a model off of which we can design it. So I don't think this is a multi-year set of changes. I think this is something that pieces of this could be in place in months. Pieces of this could take much longer. Obviously, we can't commit to anything right now because we haven't scoped it or developed any specific ideas for the developers to scope. So I think this is the idea generation phase, and we'll get into it. But my gut tells me there are things we could do in the short term.
And I think this alternating mining idea sounds interesting. That mining pools wouldn't be very profitable to keep running a large amount of mining, hardware at one time if they don't know when the next block is going to be. That's
well, as long as it is predictable over a period of time, and they could always
decentralized.
Yeah, I mean, it would certainly reduce the amount of mining on the network, but there would always be some economic incentive for some of the miners to remain. So, these are all ideas. They have pros and cons. We need.
So you sound more confident that the conversation around this thing and getting to the plan is probably going to take longer than the actual execution from a development standpoint. Would you say? Would you agree?
Probably. I think that the community consensus issue is going to be significant on some of these ideas. I think some of these are no-brainers, though. So we'll see. I haven't even seen the reaction of the network yet. I've been in interviews ever since I got off.
Right. Yeah.
And so all I know is that I've heard from a couple of people that the reaction has been generally pretty positive, and from one person, they viewed it as overwhelmingly positive. So, I don't know. And I think that there's going to be a process of digestion here. We've all just been exposed to this. Yeah. It's going to take some time to really have the ideas settle in and settle down, right? I think that, we're going to have this period in which people are having a debate. They may be uncomfortable with it at first and develop comfort, or they might think that it sounds good, and as they dig into the issues, they become more uncomfortable with it. Truth is, we don't know how this conversation is going to evolve a week from now.
Yeah.
A week from now, I'll have a better answer.
Yeah. I'm excited to see all of this chaos and transformation blow up and settle down into some great ideas. And I think that's only going to be healthy for the network. So
I know there's a solution here where there's a will, there's a way. We know what the problem is. We know what the solution set may consist of. There may be other ideas out there that we haven't really looked at yet, but this is solvable. And all we need is the will and coming together as a community. Our governance system can help us come together. We've had controversial issues in the past that get resolved through the governance system. We agree that we vote as a community, and the vote stands. And even people who don't necessarily agree can go along with the outcome there because they feel like their voice was heard. And so I think that we can come through this much stronger.
Awesome.
Well, I think that's all I have. You got anything, Danny?
You mentioned remaining the dominant X-11 if we do stay with mining, proof of work mining.
Yeah, so one of the criteria that we feel pretty strongly about is if we're going to depend on proof of work mining for some portion of our solution, we need to be the dominant chain. You do not want to be a minority chain because that makes you vulnerable to attack. one of the things I mentioned during the talk is that lucky for us, we're the dominant X-11 chain by a long shot. We have a lot of room to work with and still remain the dominant chain. What we don't want to do is have a solution where 99.9% of our mining goes away. At that point, we may be vulnerable if there aren't really robust systems in place to mitigate that.
So you would definitely really have to analyze the alternating idea too at that point, so that you don't lose that dominance.
And that may need to be looked at over time. If another X-11 chain becomes much more prominent over the next couple of years and starts to outstrip or approach our X-11 mining capability, we might need to relook at that allocation or look at alternatives that don't rely on proof of work. So I think the message here is, if we keep proof of work somewhere in our system, and we don't know if that is the case, if we can, of course, come up with solutions that don't depend on it, that's even better. But if it's in there, we better be the dominant one.
So this is such a blockbuster idea here that we kind of lost the focus of what this was all about, and that's evolution. So when evolution?
Yeah. Well,
where's my evolution?
We're going to EvoNet later this month. The developers are highly confident that we're going to meet the deadline that we committed to over the summer, and so those timelines have all stuck. We're going to need help with testing. We're going to roll out the functionality in phases and test in phases, and we rolled out that test plan today to say, here's the components we're going to work on first. It's going to be focused primarily around identity and the naming service.
And it won't be called Evolution. It's going to be called DashPay, correct?
Well, the consumer application has always been called DashPay, and it's one of the applications that we're launching on top of Dash Platform. Evolution was more of a set of concepts. This is these concepts rolling out in products. And the products are called DashPay and Dash Platform, and Dash Platform consists of DAPI and Dash Drive. And so this is the coming of fruition of a set of ideas and functionality that was termed Evolution. Now that products are actually coming out. And so that's what's exciting.
So what would be the main features I would expect when EvoNet goes live?
When EvoNet goes live, it's going to be primarily focused on, these are still going to be command line tests that we're going to be running in terms of creating usernames and registering those on the blockchain and doing some of these very basic data-oriented contracts with the network. When we work the bugs out with those, we will move on to the next set of capabilities that build on that. Okay, now the ability to connect using a light client to that system that works well and register a name. The ability to connect through a light client and make a payment. And so we'll build on the functionality. We're not going to test everything at once. We're going to test the base layers first and then move on to the higher layers and start to test out all of the functionality. As we get into this process, we'll start to learn more about how long it's taking to test and when we think we can go to mainnet. And so that's the ultimate culmination is, when can we go to mainnet? Let's see how the testing goes. And the more the community participates in the testing and uncovering bugs and figuring out what we need to go out and prioritize and fix, the sooner we'll get there. So we need the community's support in testing out some of these things.
Yeah. So what's the best way to get started testing if we wanted to participate? Those of us in the audience.
Well, that will be released along with the release to EvoNet. We did talk today about the release of our developer platform. So if you're a developer, that's where you can start to get involved in testing some of those features. We've already put the front end, or we put a DAPI front end on our existing testnet so that you can start to experiment with some of the commands. You can actually run live transactions against testnet using the example code on the developer site. And so you can start to familiarize yourself now so that when this does release to EvoNet, you're familiar with the commands, you're familiar with what's supposed to be coming back to you, and you can participate in the testing process. That's the place to start right now. And then specifics on how to submit bugs and things like that will come out when we, do the blog post around, okay, we're going to EvoNet now, and here's how you can participate. So that information will come out later.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like a great place to start if you're curious and have any level of basic command or code skills at all to play around with the DAPI. It sounds like that's something is really attractive to me, and I think will be to a lot of other developers.
Yeah, and I think that you'll see that we've tried to make it very easy to use, and we've really mimicked it against Stripe and some of these other payment APIs out there, so that you can start to actually see and experiment the code directly in the documentation.
Evan's original vision of his grandmother being able to use it.
Yep, it's finally coming to fruition. Yep. So DashPay, we have to deploy Dash Platform to mainnet and have it be fully deployed by the network before we can start launching applications. So we can't have 50% of the masternodes upgraded and then start deploying applications. We have to wait for it to be complete. So there will be a delay between Dash Platform and what people usually think of as DashPay, as Evo, which is the DashPay functionality, right, where you can create a contact list and send and receive payment requests. So that's a little further down the road. We'll start with a beta on mainnet, and then we'll release it to the public.
I don't know if you can comment on this, but will there be any more input from Dash Labs, or is that even needed anymore?
Dash Labs really had their own set of research that they were doing. They published a small amount of it, I think early this year or something. But we really haven't, that wasn't ever a part of Dash Platform or what the product was that we were pursuing.
So it's not really even necessary.
It's not related in any way. Yeah.
All right. You got anything else, Chuck? I think.
No. Well, thanks, Brian. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you too. Hope things are going well.
Yeah, I mean, hey, live and work and breathe, and I'm still part of the space and still excited about the future. So and still a fan of Dash,
Yeah,
and go to dash.org to find out more. Are there any other locations where people can find out more about this bold new change?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to be posting the recording of the event. It was obviously a very long event. There were some technical components in the middle that probably aren't applicable to most people unless you're a developer. But there are some segments in there that I would encourage people to watch and really get a better understanding of our organization and how we work and what it is that we're working on. And so, there's a lot of meaty information that would get people up to speed quickly.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks so much, Ryan.
Thank you.
Take care.